Tonight, we're reminded just how effective bribes could be in the Soviet Union, plus the pros and cons of working with the KGB, the Soviet people rising to the task, and when can you see nude minors on TV? When you spell it Miners. The Chernobyl After Show starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
That was sort of a clickbaity turn of phrase. Welcome to the Chernobyl After Show. I am Christian Blatt, joined as always by my co-hosts. Please greet yourselves and the people in the audience.
Hey, I'm Jeremy Dan from the USC Marshall School of Business.
Hey guys, I'm Julana Dizon.
So no shortage of disturbing and horrifying imagery this week, but we'll get into all of that. I just want to go big picture first for episode 3 of Chernobyl, Open Wide, O Earth. Julana, just overall thoughts and one or two things that really stood out for you while you watched this episode.
For me, I was just overly blown away by Ludmilla and her whole deal with the hospital and, you know, visiting her husband and just that whole scenario.
Yeah, every part of that, which is the, well, that's what I referenced in the top, you bribe your way in, you can go even somewhere that is extremely, one of the most hazardous places on earth is inside the hospital number 6 in
and
Moscow.
The fact that she just stayed there for days.
And it was half an hour, no contact. Are you pregnant? So, yeah, got it. No, definitely not pregnant. Although I got the impression that maybe she didn't know, but I don't know because we'll talk about it. Jeremy, overall, your thoughts on the episode and what really was your major takeaway from this?
She knew, but the takeaway, what's interesting about this episode is that in a way it's kind of the calm before the storm. We heard in the first episode how Legasov said this was madness, and we certainly saw elements of madness in the last couple of episodes. Really huge mobilizations, troops arriving, the helicopters arriving. Now everything, according to a lot of people, seems like it's cooling off. The scale of it is smaller. There's not the threat of the thermal explosion, which maybe takes out a third of all of continental Europe in terms of a habitable place, but there's still a lurking next madness and emergency there. And so this is that calm before the storm in parts of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I found, there a lot of it is striking, just the level of the desire to cover things up, as we'll talk about, and just the extent to which the problem continues to grow from episode to episode. It's like there's always an assessment of here's what the impact's going to be. We've addressed one problem, and now here's several more that have an even greater impact. We'll go through the episode a little bit. I like that we picked up literally right where we left off last week, which it was with the radiation levels rising, the flashlights going out, and I think the best way to describe that sequence was frantic claustrophobia. It was just like they were very determined they had to do it, but it was so well shot and disorienting and really uncomfortable. And it's just that overall feeling. I don't know about you, Julana. It's like, I am so glad that I'm not there right now.
I actually felt the opposite. I felt like it was...
You wanted to be there with all of them to hang out?
I didn't want to be there. But
let's go swimming.
Given the way that the last episode ended, I felt frantic at the end of the last episode. This one opens up where they have flashlights again. They can see. So it seems like everything got better. They found the valve. They opened it. And then they got out and everybody cheered. So it seemed like it got solved much more, quick and peacefully than I would have imagined.
Well, I did like while they were waiting, Legasov answers the question, is it possible that the water's already killed them? He's like, yep, it definitely could have happened, so they might not ever come out. And I don't know what you thought, Jeremy, but they finally come out successful, and they're given some kind of alcohol to cheer, and then I believe they're very swiftly all rounded up and put into a truck.
It was probably the four glasses of vodka over 4 hours that will cleanse everything out of your system.
Exactly.
So they come out and he is triumphant. I mean, like literally, the war number 1 and fists to the air, and even the soldiers are celebrating, and there aren't the ill effects. I mean, the people in the plant were exposed more quickly because they had no shielding, and it wasn't levels down, it was the level of the core. and they started to be burnt on the spot. But what we hear is these people are getting it over a period of weeks. What was interesting, though, one of the people who knows, who is Boris Sherbina, played by Skarsgård, he mildly, weakly waves from 20 meters away. He's not going to get close to them because he's cursed with that higher level of knowledge about what's going to happen to them and what would happen to him if he got that higher level of radiation more closely.
Yeah, I mean, they have that conversation about, what's going to happen to our boys and what's going to happen to us. And so Legasov goes through very descriptively telling you what it looks like and the sort of terrible fact where it's like, well, there's going to be that one day where you think that you're past it.
Latency.
Yeah. And it's essentially what we see later in the episode, which I think the bulk of this episode, I don't know if the bulk of it takes place in Hospital Number 6, but that's the scenes that have the most impact, I think, for me. And it's all the stuff we already referenced, which is they really don't want her to. Is her name Ludmilla?
Ludmilla.
She didn't look like a Ludmilla, but there she is. And obviously, you understand her point of view. She just wants to see her husband. And I think if they said don't touch him and he looked normal and he looked fine, you could understand that. But you take a look at him even at this point in the episode, and you're like, that doesn't look like somebody you should touch. But, I guess it's very easy to have somebody look the other way.
Well, if you think about it, he is a firefighter. She's come home
That's true.
to him before where he's probably had some minor burns, where he's had smoke all over his face. She's used to seeing him looking beaten up and probably was fearing the worst. Then she goes in and they're playing cards. They just have nice IVs. They're actually joking, oh, look who's here. And that is that latency period. And you could see where maybe because she arrived just at that moment where he looked at his best, like he has some first degree burns that he will recover from.
Yeah, and even going back to the first episode, I feel like her character is someone who is instinctually smart because she was the first one that was like, that looks dangerous. You shouldn't go there.
I'm going to stay inside. Yeah, I don't want to go watch the fire at the nuclear power plant. Right. That just sounds bad.
Right. So I feel like in the hospital, and she does say it won't be much longer. So I think after maybe that first day, she probably has an instinct that he's not going to be alive for very much longer.
Right. And I don't know. I mean, I guess she doesn't have the realization of just how bad it is for her to even be near him. Probably not until the very end of the episode is, I think, when it starts to sink in, which obviously we'll talk about.
Her empathy and sympathy overcame her smarts.
Mm-hmm.
And her sense of survival was certainly not at the forefront of her decision making.
His hand on her stomach, which is, I think, that foreshadowing of why she definitely knew. And yes, she's not showing the savvy she showed in the first episode.
Yeah, but hey, love makes us do crazy things. Mm-hmm. There's another great exchange between Legasov and, I always call him Boris because we're on a first name basis, is just that the realization that the evacuation zone was only 30 kilometers and it needed to be 200 kilometers. And he says, is this really the way that it all works? Some uninformed decision will cost who knows how many lives by some apparatchik, some career party man. And of course, I'm a career party man, so watch your tone. But it's absolutely a point well made, Jeremy, that's exactly what happens here and probably happens every day. Well, honestly, in any government, but especially in the Soviet Union. It's just the consequences are usually nowhere on this level, right? I mean, I think you can usually survive in a system like this for what was it, like 70 some odd years at this point. And it's only when the stakes are this high that, it gets to be a huge problem, right?
Well, number one, the stakes are high. We heard the comments in the previous episode of this is an event that has never happened on this planet. So when you have a society built around 5-year plans and the predictability you try to get from that, I think they even were willing to lose out on some productivity to get the predictability within their society and you have career bureaucrats that are used to making decisions and not having them questioned because they want to have that predictability, that's where things can really go wrong. We hear the exchange later about that when he tries to, Legasov tries to insert himself, and Rizkov, the premier, had made the call, and even Gorbachev was happy to say, the call has been made. And Gorbachev goes in and out of listening versus covering his ears. And that was a moment where he was not going to listen. The call has been made. Someone else's name is on this decision, not mine. And let's move forward.
Well, and Gorbachev has the approach, Julana, that you're there for one reason, to make it stop. Like I don't need any of this sass from you, right? You know, it's like, even if what you're saying makes sense, it's like that's not what your part is. I mean, I think, especially in a communist system like the Soviet Union, your roles were very clearly defined, and you're wise to not really venture beyond what parameters have been set for you.
Yeah, and that's hard for Legasov because he's really the only one in the situation that knows the real impact of how bad everything could be, aside from
Julana. Yeah.
And
whose name I literally just looked up a second before you did.
I know, it's on the wrong side of the paper. But yeah, it's like he has this feeling that he needs to tell the information because he's the only one that really knows it, but nobody wants to listen to him. And that's hard, but I commend him for still speaking up and at least trying to get it out there. That way I feel like he's doing his part, and if they're not listening to him, at least he did what he could.
And just imagine if he didn't speak up the first time when the meeting was adjourned and he hit the table and he pled his case, you know, if they just sort of if he let things spiral out of control, which I think that's what we're seeing. He's not that kind of person who could have let that happen.
Well, that's why he and Sherbina are just proving themselves continually to be a good duo to be solving this. And we see Sherbina more the operator. He is the communist apparatchik, knows what cement looks like when it burns, knows how to deal with coal miners, is more savvy within the system, where Legasov is willing to be, first of all, he has the nuclear knowledge. Second of all, he's willing to have his naivete come out. He fights it every once in a while. He does make some comments like he did in the hotel that prove savvy, where he did not tell people they should be worried about the radiation. But he is still 90%, 80% the idealist that really wants to have the truth out there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we really see is just more and more of these things, like the fact that if there is, you know, so the meltdown has begun is what becomes apparent at this point in the episode. And about 6 to 8 weeks, I guess it could melt down into the water supply. And that's when we start to get some stats, like the fact that it would be the water supply for 50 million people. And when we get to our by the number segment, you have all sorts of comparisons for some of the areas effective in here. One other number that is thrown out is that the half-life for this event was 24,000 years. So the real, you know, it's like, well, yeah, how long is this going to last? It's like, you know what, don't even ask, because it's so far beyond any and all of our lifetimes that it's what you think about when you hear. And, you know, when we do our final episode, we'll talk a little bit about the situation in Chernobyl, the Chernobyl area now. But
well,
people go now, and you're like, it wasn't that. It was like 33 years ago. What are you going for? Like, you think it's safe? It's not safe. Don't go there. Anyway, sorry, what were you going to say?
Just so people, you know, so everyone's on the same page, the half-life, which is going to be referred to a lot, that is the time it takes for half of that radioactive material to decay and lose its radioactivity. So essentially, 24,000. It takes 24,000 years for it to get half as bad as it is now. So that is obviously
so it doesn't even
thousands
go away
of lifetimes.
In 24,000.
Right.
Yeah, right. No, that's a good point.
It still kills you in 24,000 years.
Yeah. So we see sort of the other side of that latency period in the hospital. One of the things that Legasov described was you can't even administer morphine for the pain. And we see that Ludmila's husband reaches that point fairly quickly. in the course of this episode, and it's uncomfortable to watch, but they did such a good job with I meant to make a note of who did all the prosthetics and makeup, because very difficult to look at, but so well done throughout the course of the episode, because you have these evolving horrible faces, and which is another thing that we'll kind of talk about, some of the genetic impact of all of this. Let's talk about, well, you know what, before we talk about anything else, I know Julana has a very important message to share with each and every one of you. So that's more important than what I was going to say.
It's my favorite message of the week. What's up, guys? Before we move into our next topic, we just want to thank you guys for making us the ESPN of TV talk. And for us to continue to grow, we could really use your help. And this is how you can help us. If you're on YouTube right now watching, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. And if you're on iTunes, you can give us a 5-star rating if you're enjoying the show. But no matter where you are, please leave us a comment so you can get involved in the conversation. We love to hear what you guys think about the show. We've even had some people comment that they're nuclear engineers, which I think is really cool, or people that grew up in the area. And being a part of AfterBuzz TV has meant so much to all of us. We really appreciate you supporting us and giving us a chance to do what we love, which is hosting and talking about TV. So thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments from the chat. Duplicat points out that no one has any idea how dangerous it is in the hospital. Long-term effects of radiation was probably suppressed information. There are only a few people who seem to be well aware of, the severity of this. There was the I guess the female doctor in the first episode who we've seen, and obviously Julana knows because of how the lengths she goes to prepare herself. And then one other comment from Marie Antoinette's Cake, which is a wonderful username, Marie Antoinette's Cake. Everyone in the former USSR appears to be completely naive to the facts of radiation poison. Nobody has the proper protection to wear, so those kind of comments go hand in hand. It's they're naive because the state wants them to be naive and wants them to not know just how bad this situation is. And I was thinking that when the scene's in the hospital, I'm like, how effective is that plastic really? And the fact that you have one of those little masks on your face.
I mean, it is amazing. This was a time, the 80s, when the Cold War was at one of its heights. Even if there wasn't the fear of meltdowns, there was the fear of nuclear incidents via bombings and things like that. And we see the response team to this, and seemed very capable with their leader from the military, still had to put makeshift lead shielding on a truck to go measure this, because that was the team that responded to chemical incidents. So they did not have the response. There was no lead shielding in the hospital in that town. There was no, in particular, lead shielding on suits. I think we just had basically a military scuba suit. So they didn't even, well, according to what we see in the show, didn't even have a limited amount of radiation shielding suits, etc.
Let's talk a little bit about the KGB. When Legasov goes with Boris for a walk, they see that couple from the bar, which is when we saw that in that episode, I didn't think anything other than they were just people who had a question. It's like, hey, look, it's this guy who seems to be, he's dressed like somebody from Moscow. He must know something. And, sort of the point is like everything's bugged. And if you're seeing them out in public, it means they want you to know that they're watching you. Julana, what did you think sort of about that realization and that recognition from Legasov?
I also, like you, I didn't realize in the episode prior to this who they were. I just thought they were guests. And I kind of like that whole exchange of the conversation that happened around the KGB.
Well, we can talk about that right now.
I know you have quotes.
Well, so. It's kind of a. Well, first, Jeremy, what did you think about that realization? Did it's always trying to see did you have the right mindset for the Soviet Union? Did you think it was suspicious when that couple asked him? Did you think that they might be KGB? Had you watched enough episodes of The Americans where you didn't trust them?
I did watch all the episodes of The Americans, and I recognized their watches as KGB watches. But obviously we didn't know it there, but that again shows you the perfect duo aspect in yin and yang of Sherbina and Legasov, is that Sherbina knew they had to leave the room. You know, this is the room we've set up in this hotel.
Yeah.
We are the ranking people on site, but that doesn't shield us from the state. And so we are going to take a walk. He was expecting to be followed. He knew the game. And of course, then we have the awesome conversation later with the deputy
Well, yeah, let's talk about
director.
that.
Yeah.
And that's sort of when they're going through kind of the unfortunate leak of information early after the accident, and the fact that they've been able to keep tight control over it up, at every point since then. And he actually says, "We hope we've lived up to the highest standards of the KGB." And the minister says, "You have." So
in the middle of a very important meeting about possible deaths and all
Yeah.
that, they say, "You've kept the secrets. Good
right,
job."
which is like, to them, it's just as, if not more important. The fact that this story got out there at all. I mean, earlier in the episode, you see Gorbachev kind of poring over these American newspapers and just all the things that they're saying. So we get through. We'll kind of circle back to some of the other content from that meeting, but so this KGB minister says, "I know you've heard the stories about the KGB, and people are following you, but people are following those people. People follow me." And I love that he says, there's the old Russian proverb, "Trust but verify." The Americans are giving credit to Reagan for that. And I was just like, wait, is it true? It's a very slight tangent. It's very reminiscent of the Russian character Chekhov from Star Trek, who likes to think that everything is of Russian origination. So it actually made me laugh at that moment. Which there's a couple of times where this episode was funny, by the way, and we'll talk more about one of them. But let me ask Julana, sort of that explanation of like the circle of the KGB, everybody watching everybody else. What did you think about that realization and just him putting it that succinctly, what life must be like under that kind of a system?
Well, I think life must be really stressful, and that's a reason why people feel like they can't fully express themselves or be themselves, because it's true, you could never know who's watching you, who's listening to you. If you're just a regular citizen, like you said, you wouldn't think that rooms could be bugged or that the people next to you could be eavesdropping on you, because
we're being recorded.
You don't function like that, right?
Well, we are being recorded right now. That's absolutely true. Yeah. How do you feel they did, Jeremy, sort of explaining that approach towards life in the Soviet Union?
I think it comes through from the first episode when Legasov has to hide the tapes and he has to bring his rubbish and his cinders, I believe it was, out. We see it at the very beginning. We see the party apparatchiks at the power plant being whisked off, Brukhanov and Fomin.
Oh yeah.
There's definitely always that hanging over, but I think it would rarely. It had also its face that was productive in the director or the assistant director of the KGB, when he still knew when to get down to business when someone put all their cards on the table. So when Legasov said he would vouch for her and he would be accountable,
right? Speaking
for
of Ulana,
he knew the deputy director that there's nothing being hidden here. 100% okay to free her. I'll see that it's done. And it's an example of where his naivete finally became a strength, because the director knew there was no hidden agenda.
There's two moments there that are important, at least as far as I was concerned. The first is that, yes, the assistant to the director of the KGB says, well, you'll be accountable for her. So it's like, basically, if she gets in trouble again, I don't care what knowledge you have in your head and how much of an asset you are. You're going to be the one to disappear, as it were. But then also, Boris says to him that went surprisingly well. You came off as a naive idiot, and idiots are not a threat. So I thought, yes, being that upfront, I think most people aren't going to approach even a very low-level KGB official and be so upfront. But I think it was the only play that Legasov had, so we'll kind of circle back as to what that was, which was she was getting some very important information when people would talk to her. And that was some of the most difficult things to watch inside the hospital number 6. The guy whose face is melting and also then blood starts pouring out of his nose. and then that's sort of the moment
Top
where she just is. She has to be human enough to reach through the thing and dab the fact that that was happening. And of course, all I could think of is like, well, you might as well not be wearing the protection then if you're going to actually reach in there and, even through rubber gloves, touching blood coming out of his body. But good for her that she was trying to be a good person. But she gets most of the information that she wants. And consistently, the thing that comes up is that they did turn it off. That's when the plant exploded, and multiple people said it, but that's the thing that doesn't make any sense. So these are the sort of things, I don't know about you, Julana, where it's very tempting to like Google, wait, what really did happen? And I'm like, I'd rather wait a couple more weeks and let them tell me exactly what happened instead of, finding out on Wikipedia what may or may not have happened. What do you think when we start to, see where the evidence is leading us at this point?
Well, my first thought was that it seemed very suspicious, and it almost put me in a mindset of, was this a conspiracy? Did somebody do this on purpose?
Yeah, all good questions, by the way.
And that's about as far as I got.
Right. No, because, you never know what value, and I think that if it were to happen on purpose, I don't think anyone would have weighed the actual impact that this would have. The way that we see people throughout the series reacting like, well, that's impossible. That didn't happen. No, you didn't see graphite, any of that stuff, Jeremy. It's just no one entertains the idea that this is what could have happened because it's just because of just how unlikely they have been led to believe it would be, right?
Yes, they still can't even fathom, even these two most expert people, why that kind of nuclear reactor would explode. They've done the math. They haven't been able to work it out even now. And that's why Legasov comes up with his line, you need to pursue every possibility, no matter how likely it is or who there is to blame. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked ahead, but who knows if he was involved in some of those procedures and protocols and things like that, and where that it seemed like it might be leading in that direction. But that's maybe too aggressive foreshadowing or analysis on my part. But they talked about her. She, I believe, says that they can't stop me. You can't stop a lunatic, and he says no, a scientist. And you wonder. You probably need a little bit of both in this, or you need a lot of scientists, but a little lunatic in this scenario to be that fighter that's going to continue looking without regard for your own welfare. These people are going to start looking into this, and we learn that her character is a combination of many scientists, but many people started to do investigations and look for information and put out information to their own great risk.
Let's talk about the miners, which is the rare representation of something that can actually make you laugh in this series. Starting with I believe he was the Minister of Mines, the Minister of Coal is actually what his title was. That he goes to the miners to tell them, here's where you have to go. And as we'll kind of see, you have to be very direct and upfront with these miners because they actually have a great deal of power because of how essential they are in keeping the Soviet Union running. So he explains to them what it is, and I think that for the most part they seem to understand not the severity of it, but they know that, like, okay, this is not going to be great for our longevity. But they've also, when you're part of the Soviet Union, if you're a Communist Party member in good standing, you're going to do what's asked of you. So I do sort of love the fact that everybody makes sure to get coal all over his suit. And the one guy even says, now you look like the Minister of Coal. What are you going to say?
What's interesting about these guys is they do, after he explains the situation to them, they rally like we've seen so many other people rally. But a lot of the people that were rallying before were at the plant and in the town. The firefighters, the technicians who went down into the drainage areas. These people were hundreds of miles away to the northeast in Russia. So what's interesting about them is they are, they show I mean, they are tough, they are gritty, and they are resisting. But when it comes time to rally, they're rallying for people hundreds of miles away and for the greater safety of the Soviet Union.
Right, and I think that it's good advice that Legasov gets, which is that he's not good at lying. And Boris says, you have to tell the truth. This is one of the best lines in the series so far. He's like, these men work in the dark. They see everything. And it's very clear that that's the approach you have to take, is you don't try and outsmart them. Don't try and pull a fast one. You tell them what it is. And because, again, these are good Soviets, they're, to a man, everybody, rises to the occasion and actually goes and do this, and he asks some really hard questions, which is including, is it going to fall on top of us? And he's like, well, not if you're done in 6 weeks, and then do these gas masks really work? And he makes the point, if they worked, you'd be wearing them. So I think a lot of that is, to sort of make people feel better. Julana, what did you think as we get to know the miners? And I didn't actually catch the name of the lead miner, the kind of the boss miner, which I should have. But what are just some of your general thoughts on the miners?
I really appreciated the humor aspect that they provided and the little bit of relief, because it's been so dark and heavy the last 2 episodes, so it was nice to just have a little bit of lighter scenes and funny. But I really liked his just like no BS kind of attitude. I think he's my favorite character so far.
Yeah, I mean, he, look, there's a lot of people who are good, well-intentioned, but not necessarily likable characters. Like, it's arguable as to whether or not Legasov is a likable character, But I do, and I found the fact that it was so hot. Jeremy, you had, so they say it's 50 degrees, which sounds very cold to us with our crazy Fahrenheit. But so how hot was it in those tunnels?
Almost as hot as this studio, 122 degrees.
Right, it's only 119 in the studio, though. And then they won't give them fans, which the explanation on why not to give them fans makes perfect sense. It's like, we get dust stirred up all the time. It's like, not this kind of dust. You don't want to be breathing that anymore. So they make the unique decision of just digging completely in the nude, which is interesting because he says that's how our grandfathers did it. I'm like, wait, what, they did?
They didn't have ventilation back in the early part of the century.
Yeah.
For coal mines in Russia and then the Soviet Union,
So, I found all of that to be very interesting and, of course, entertaining,
One final aspect there. These guys are used to a profession where they know their lives are being shortened. It's a fact. Even today, in the safer United States, coal miners essentially go into that profession knowing their lives are being shortened by lung disease and every other thing. This is just one other risk factor on top of it. So the clothes maybe provided a little bit of shielding. He knew it was not a lot. They know that calculated risk and that numbers game almost as well as Legasov knows, just in a different way.
Yeah, and in the there's after the episodes, there's always a little bit of a behind the scenes thing where one of the things they talk about is just how important the miners were and the leverage they had, sort of what I referenced, but also that in reality these miners dug these tunnels in record time, and they did it under the understanding they were saving millions of people. And while there isn't hard, fast data on specific miners who were there, the reports are that a number of them died very young, probably not too long after this.
Another wrinkle in it is Legasov in the conversation with Julana, where he says, I judge the possibility of this full meltdown at 50%. She said, I think it might be 40. Essentially, they described it as the most urgent thing. This is 100% definitely needed, and we need to start now. But the whole thing there was Legasov running the numbers and saying this is a probability game again. So he is also, like Gorbachev and the other people, willing to argue that these lives getting in harm's way, it's all worth it.
Julana, I wanted to get your reaction to the final sequence in the show, which is the bodies being put into coffins. We watch them nailed shut encased in some kind of like concrete, and then
zinc,
actual
zinc
Okay,
coffins.
so that's zinc, and then we watch concrete poured on top of it, and that seems to sort of be the moment I referenced earlier that Ludmilla's like, oh, it's that bad. You can't actually put their bodies in the ground because of the impact they'll have. Just give me your thoughts on watching all of that unfold.
Right. For me, that shot, my first thought was, this is a beautiful shot in a way, a very final sealing moment, and it really does make you realize how contaminated they are, I guess, or how radioactive, because that's what I've been thinking the whole episode and the whole other episodes is this thing is so what's the right word? It's so dangerous for people to touch, but like every time they go, like the men that went in the water, they're coming out
hidden and dangerous.
yeah, and they're coming out like everything they touch, all of their uniforms, all of this stuff has to be contaminated and needs to be put in the ground like that, but they're just walking around like it's okay. And this scene for me, and I think for Ludmilla and the other characters that were there, like you said, really drives home the fact that they need to be as concealed as possible. And then if you think about today that there's just cement graves in that area of the world, it's a little bit crazy to think about.
Yeah, and it's this sort of beautiful, like operatic moment as we watch, and it seems like Ludmilla's a little bit horrified when she sees the cement truck, backing up, and it's going to just pour it on there, and it's not typically what we see. We're very limited on time. We're practically out of time. There's two things I want to make sure we get to. The first, Julana, I know that we're going to see this in the weeks ahead. Some of the genetic impact that this radiation has, and I know you looked into that a little bit, so I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, I just did a little bit of research, and so basically there's somatic damage, which is what we were seeing in the hospital, damage to the individual but not the reproductive cells. So that would be like the sickness, the hair loss, the internal bleeding, pretty much everything we saw with the patients in the hospital. And then genetic damage, which is when damage happens to your reproductive cells, and that's what affects your offspring. So I think we're going to be seeing some effects of that in the next episodes to come. But just like as a recent kind of number, by 2005, there were more than 6,000 cases of thyroid cancer reported in children and adolescents who were exposed at that time. And they say it's because of the iodine that was deposited in the pastures, and the cows ate the grass, and then the kids were drinking the milk. So, which
is one of the things that Legasov mentions, is you have to kill all the animals, but does not appear that that's what happened.
Right.
So, so that's the gist of what you found, and I feel like we'll be referencing that again as soon as next week. And then, Jeremy, I know you've got some by the numbers, and I would love to end on some of those numbers.
Yeah, one thing about this is we've talked about the scope. And for instance, when they talked last week about the potential thermal explosion that would send all of the radioactive debris into the wind all over Eastern Europe and the Ukraine and Belarus, and that would have been a swath about 1/3 the size of the United States, essentially the United States west of the Rockies. Now they're talking about a much smaller area of damage, but it's still immense. So they talked about essentially 2,600 square kilometers need to be evacuated. That's pretty close to 1,000 square miles. So to give a little context there, that's essentially saying the state of Rhode Island needs to be evacuated, or for West Coasters, 2 times the city of LA. And we are here, and we know this is a very big city within the city limits. And then we hear talking about not only do you need to evacuate all those people, essentially we have a death zone in 100 square kilometers directly around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Well, that 100 square kilometers is about 39 square miles, and that's double the size of Manhattan approximately. So 2 Manhattans where they had to dig up many feet of all the soil, cut down every tree, and kill every animal. So you could see where they say it's going to take 3 years and 750,000 men. And for a little context, the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan at the time. They peaked in their combat forces there at about 115,000 people. So we're talking about more than 6 Afghanistans of troop commitment. and they lost 15,000 men during that. And from what Legasov says, he essentially said it will be thousands and potentially tens of thousands. So we're talking about probably losing, they're estimating at the time, I don't know if we know the stats right now, but essentially another Afghanistan within their own borders.
Yeah, and obviously the Soviet Union was just such a massive landmass with so many people, and those numbers being thrown around, it's significant even when you take that into consideration. In any case, we are out of time, but we will certainly be back next Tuesday at 9 Pacific to talk about episode 4 of Chernobyl. But until then, Julana, where can people find you?
Hey guys, you guys can keep up with me on Instagram at Julana.
It's just at Julana.
Yeah, it's
Look
just
at
at
you.
Julana.
Wow.
I didn't even think I
was
realized
very, very early in the
Yeah,
Instagram.
you're very smart.
Do you have Julana.com as well?
No, JulanaDzon.com.
Okay, so now we've got that. And Jeremy, where would people find you if they were to look?
Please don't look for me. But find me here next week and find me Sunday, even though Game of Thrones is over. We're still going to talk about the documentary and wrap everything up. So the next 2 Sundays right here.
Yeah, it seems like everybody loved that finale, so I'm sure there's not much to talk about. I don't watch the show, so I don't know. But anyway, I'm Christian Blatt. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. And if you want some lighter fare, you can find me this Thursday at 10 Pacific on the Twilight Zone after show. That's all the time for now, but we will see you next Tuesday, comrades.
Our founder, Kevin Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.